Amis, chers auditeurs, auditrices, dear friends and listeners, tonight is the night again. Ce soir, vous avez deux poètes exceptionnels dont un, en tout cas, at least one of them, est en train d'essayer de projeter une vidéo pendant les jours les plus longs de l'année, où tout est très très blanc ici. You know, be good with it, and we'll see how much you see on a night like tonight. I thank the double changers who are here again for this incredible event. And if anybody wants to sign up to the newsletter of this place for all the different events, vous pouvez tout à fait vous inscrire à la newsletter d'ici, si jamais vous le souhaitez. C'est un petit cahier qui est à l'entrée. Vous avez ici accroché les travaux en cours, car on ne peut pas changer tout comme ça du jour au lendemain. Les travaux en cours de Abdelkader Benchama, le duo La Marche aux Vises, le duo au fond Anne et Patrick Poirier, et derrière moi, ça va être Tan Lin. Bonne soirée, merci beaucoup d'être là. Et éteignez vos portables, ou du moins, mettez-les en silence. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Michael. Merci de nous accueillir encore une fois dans cet endroit magnifique. Merci, Michael. Merci toute ton équipe de l'atelier, Sarah et Gaëtan. Merci à vous, le public, d'être là ce soir. Et merci évidemment aux deux auteurs qui ont accepté notre invitation, Tan Lin et Danielle Mémoire. Nous sommes très heureux d'entendre ce soir Tan Lin et Danielle Mémoire, associés ici par la force des circonstances, mais dont il m'est apparu qu'ils partageaient néanmoins certaines choses, disons un rapport complexe, sinon contrarié à la poésie, à la fiction, à la vérité et à la narration. Tan Lin écrit des livres, mémoires, romans, poésie, réalise des films, crée des installations. Il a élaboré une poétique de l'art ambiant qu'il a théorisé dans un texte intitulé « Le disco comme système d'exploitation » qui a été traduit en français par Maxime Boisdy et Pierre Paulin aux éditions Mix et publié à l'occasion d'une exposition de ses travaux à la Galerie 13 à Paris en 2014. Quand les avant-gardes historiques cherchaient à attirer l'attention par la stratégie du choc ou du scandale, Tan Lin travaille au contraire l'attention flottante, diffuse. Il cultive la non-lecture, la relaxation, l'ennui. Il cherche à créer des poèmes qui échappent à la mémoire et aspire à la condition de moods ou de grooves, comme le yoga ou la disco, parce que personne n'écoute vraiment la disco, dit-il. Dans Seven Controlled Vocabularies and Obituary 2004, The Joy of Cooking, paru chez Wesleyan University Press en 2010, il s'interroge. Quelles sont les formes de non-lecture et quelles sont les non-formes que peut prendre une lecture? Poésie égale papier peint, roman égale objet design, le texte comme bande sonore d'ambiance. Duchamp voulait créer des œuvres d'art qui ne soient pas rétiniennes. Ce serait bien de créer des œuvres littéraires qui n'auraient pas besoin d'être lues, mais qui pourraient être regardées comme des napperons. La chose la plus exaspérante dans une lecture de poésie, c'est toujours le son du poète en train de lire. Fin de citation. Le film 11-Minute Painting, qui ouvrira la séance, vous donnera un plus ample aperçu de l'art poétique de Tan Lin. Tan lira ensuite un extrait de Insomnia and the Aunt, paru chez Getty Editions en 2011. Il s'agit d'un roman d'ambiance qui est peut-être une autobiographie fictionnelle, à moins qu'il s'agisse d'une version conceptuelle de la littérature d'exil et d'immigration ou d'une méditation sur la place de la télévision dans la société états-unienne. Puis Tan lira quelques poèmes du volume You and Yours, et j'accueille Tan. Voilà.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Michael, for use of the space. It's really great to be here. I was going to say something in French first, but I'm afraid I'll make a grammatical mistake, so I'm going to speak in English. And we're going to start with a video that I did. I like to make long, sort of existential videos. And I did some that were 24 hours long. It was just a 3-word sequence, and I used it to sort of process other writing. And the idea was, it's 24 hours long. It could play all day and all night in your house, and you never really have to look at it. But if it played for 10 years, eventually you would know the poem quite well. So it was an experiment in duration and boredom and all those sorts of things, and living with language without really processing it in any sort of conscious way. We're going to start with an 11-minute painting. It's an attempt to translate kind of poetry writing into the kind of related context of painting. And it's 11 minutes. We're going to run it for 5.5 minutes, something like that, and then I'm going to read. So we'll start with the videos. It's really great to be here. I know that John Yao was here last week. John was the only poetry teacher I ever had. I never went to like MFA writing schools or anything like that. So I was in grad school at Columbia, and I hadn't written poetry for a long time. So I took a course at the 63rd Street YMCA, and John was teaching the course. And it was quite fun, and I was in grad school. I had no money. Grad school in America is kind of a study in abjection. So John said, I'm teaching in New Smyrna Beach. New Smyrna Beach is in Florida. This is December, right? New York is very cold and snowy, and he said it'll be warm and we can hang out. So I went with John. I had not written a book then, and John gives assignments. So John would give an assignment. He'd say, write a 5-line poem. The first line has to use the word toaster oven in it. The second line has to use rooster. Third line has to use canary, and so on. And the poem can make 0 sense at all. And I wrote my first book. It was called Ocean Bowl Giraffe. I wrote it in 5 weeks in Florida. It was John's doing. So anyway, so I just wanted to mention that, because John, I know, was just here. All right, we're going to project the video for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to do a little reading.
Sound.
So that's the sound.
Les settings. Reprends tes settings. Mais c'est qu'il est...
Non, c'est bon. Alors...
To be read, but could be looked at, like placemats.
Okay.
To be not 11-minute painting. Reading Module V.1 by Tan Lin. The version. Aside. What are the forms of non-reading and what are the non-forms the reading might take? Poetry equals wallpaper. Novel equals design object. Text as ambient soundtrack. Duchamp wanted to create works of art that were non-retinal. It would be nice to create works of literature that didn't have to be read but could be looked at, like placemats. The most exasperating thing at a poetry reading is always the sound of a poet reading. The poem you are about to see, dub version, is executed in character and plays independently of any intuited reading, voice, practices. It takes place in real time. Unlike a feedback loop, it is different each time it is played. The poem you are reading is in BW because BW is more soothing than color. Halfway through, a color randomizer has been utilized to provide a greater sense of visual permutation, change and pleasure. One word, then another, and finally a third follow each other in a kind of slow motion, time-lapse photography. B-side, poems to be looked at versus poems to be read versus paintings to be sequenced versus paintings to be sampled. Everything that is beautiful is a code for something that is already known. Nothing should be unknown. The program. Code you are watching generates 16.7 million different shades of color backgrounds. Some of these are suggestive. None of them functions in place of memory. Memory cannot be sequenced. Memory is usually non-designed. You are about to enter 3 rooms, mirror balls, roving wallpaper, disco, home furnishings, lifestyle, getting up, and having a drink. Of course, in some novelistic vein, sequenced is highly absorptive, and so at the subliminal i.e., non-designed level, the sequencing allows reading itself to become abstract, bracketed, hypnotic, and mesmerizing. The problem with most poetry, like most design and architecture, is that it is a little too bourgeois. For this reason, the poem should never be turned off. Like a thermostat, it should regulate the room's energies. This allows the piece to constantly erase itself. As we all know, poetry should aspire not to the condition of music, but to the condition of relaxation and yoga. A lot of people think great poems should be memorized. As anyone who has ever read a poem will tell you, poems are most beautiful and least egotistical at the exact moment in which they are forgotten, like disco and other 4-on-the-floor productions. Each sequence or sentence, i.e., word set, runs 7.2 seconds, or the amount of time it takes to pronounce each word, 1 word at a time. 7 is generally thought to be the number of things the human brain can readily remember. George Muller did pioneering studies on this, and his theory is called Muller's number 7. Hence, most phone numbers are 7 digits in length. 7.2 seconds is hopefully just long enough to get the reader-viewer into a groove. It might suggest a strobe light going off at timed intervals. The interval can be beautiful because the interval can be dubbed relaxation. Like non-designed home decor has no real bounds. It supplements that thing known as real life. That is why it is so pleasurable to read. Someone, I think, said the time for poems written with words and the era of reading poems with feelings in them is long gone. Today, no poem should be written to be read, and the best form of poetry would make all our feelings disappear the moment we were having them. This sequencing of events constitutes a code more uncrackable and soothing than anything we could actually see. Paintings to be read, poems to be looked at. A beautiful poem should rewrite itself 1/2 word at a time, in predetermined intervals. With their numerous circuit boards, televisions and computers do this. Together, they enhance the micro-production and sequencing of feelings heretofore thought inaccessible, complex, or purely entropic. If all poems could just be codes projected onto a wall, those names, accessories, for things cancelling the wall would be more beautiful than anything we could feel. Nothing that is negative is simple. Everything that is artificial is related to everything else in the room. Poetry should aspire to the most synthetic forms, the colors or numbers around it, and the most synthetic forms are to be found in houses with rectilinear walls, hallways, and foyers. Each wall separates one space from another. Everything that can be divided is divided into its proper sequence, i.e., style, of ones and twos. Private spaces are over-elaborated and under-inhabited. Public spaces are under-elaborated and lack sufficient feedback.
Okay, that was roughly the first 5 minutes of that. It goes on for a while. It's quite repetitive. And that was Dorothy speaking. When we first did this, we did it in Director, which is a sort of antiquated video editing device that's not really used anymore. We converted this. But yeah, Dorothy was just one of those first voices I found on like Apple Talk or something like that. And there was a graphic over this that shows like, you know, the voice goes up and down and it looks like a live voice, but it's completely canned. Although when you look at it, it looks kind of truthful. Okay, I'm going to read from Insomnia and the Aunt. And this is a novel. And I just finished a novel called Our Feelings Were Made by Hand. And it's taken me 25 years actually to write because I didn't know what I was doing. and I sort of wanted to learn how to write fiction, and but I wanted to write fiction that was a little different than sort of what I imagine fiction to be, which is something that has a clear middle, beginning, and an end. And so I wanted like a fiction that would be very non-teleological, that would be anecdotal, highly episodic, and not really be built around recognizable characters. So I was playing with some issues having to do with the genre, I guess, of fiction. And this was the first attempt at that. It's about an aunt I have, and I know that I have aunts that are in China, but I've never met them. So this aunt is kind of an invention. And I would say I invented this aunt so that my mother wouldn't die. Now this didn't work, ça marche pas. But but that was kind of the idea. And you know, in a Chinese family, everyone who's kind of close to the family is called an aunt or an auntie. So there is that sort of cultural element here. So, but I'm going to read from this now. I have very long legs, so it's hard to get around this table. I'm going to keep track of the time. Oh, the other thing I thought about as I was writing fiction was, that, you know, when you read fiction, you don't normally think about the time of the reading or anything. It's something usually you forget, right? You get lost in the book. But I wanted the novel to function more like a clock. So I wanted it to have I wanted the novel to be sort of function like a stopwatch. On March 10th, I board a plane to Seattle, rent a white Honda Acura, and drive 87 miles to Concrete, Washington in the Bear Park Motel, a cheap motel on the western edge of North Cascades National Park that is run by a half-Chinese, half-English woman who happens to be my aunt. My aunt once told me that the rooms in the motel have 7-foot ceilings and are lined with cinder blocks painted yellow. I have a few old photographs of this motel, most of which were sent to my mother, who thinks a motel in the middle of nowhere is some kind of crime against nature and has never visited, even though my aunt has extended numerous invitations on postcards. On the day before I leave, I show my mother a postcard of the motel and a photo of a woman in a cowboy hat. My mother glances at both and says, "I do not remember." From a genealogical perspective, my aunt and uncle started their lives in America with a Chinese restaurant in Spokane and later in Seattle. Their first restaurant went out of business. They moved to Seattle to open another one. I think it was called Ming's Garden, but they got tired of serving American Chinese food. So in the early 80s, they decided to close the restaurant down and travel east into the wilderness. They settled in a place near North Cascades National Park near an Indian reservation. My aunt has always told me, in an inconsequential sort of grammatical inversion, that this is, quote, the story of your lives, only backwards, from America to the real America, from China to somewhere you've never been before. And like most Orientals in the mid-70s, or Asian people, as they have been called since the mid-90s, there was never the slightest bit of emotion on her face when she told me this story. Someone said, "The Oriental, we are good at killing emotions." And I think that person was right. The drive from Seattle to Concrete takes me 1 hour and 50 minutes. It is late afternoon when I arrive. I pull into the spot in front of the lobby window and pull my bags from the trunk. My aunt is crying in front of the lobby window, which is backlit like a movie set. She runs out, yanks the duffel from my hands, and bump drags it 2 or 3 steps in front of me to room 17, which is the room my aunt always takes me to whenever I visit. Just as Salvador Dali, when he came to New York, always stayed at the St. Regis and always in room 1628. Whenever I visit during the next decade, my aunt will perform the same actions with the same deliberate energy I associate with following a recipe one knows very well or watching reruns on TV. She will cry in exactly the same manner in front of the neon no vacancy sign in the window, with the same uncontrollable wailing and tears and half Chinese words I do not understand. None of this I can hear very well through the glass. When I think of these actions, they give off, like the paradox surrounding a guess, the appearance of slightness inside moments that have already happened, as if my aunt's life were endlessly repassing a single point in time, like an actor in a sitcom or a car going past the same highway exit night after night on its way home. And yet the repetition of my aunt's tears meant something completely different 10 years after it happened. I don't remember much of this motel, but there is, as I gather from the postcards and photographs, an occasional painting in the rooms. And once, when I first thought about visiting my aunt, when I was in high school, I remember seeing a photograph of a door that had been kicked in and which my aunt had pasted onto the back office wall. I don't know if this memory is based on something my aunt wrote me in a letter or said to me, or whether I clipped the picture from a magazine many years later. The only photograph of my aunt that I have managed to hold on to through the years has her wearing a white cowboy hat and dark sunglasses that seem out of place in the wilderness, and that signal the sort of disruption or lie that I associate with Asians in the movies, or in Ohio where I grew up, or Asians in fast food restaurants like McDonald's, where I've never eaten and where I've never seen a Chinese person eating. I have watched hundreds of movies with Asians and fake Asians in them, and the one thing that makes them all the same, except the white Asians, is that the Asians never stare into your eyes through the glass of a TV screen, and you are never allowed to look too deeply into theirs. I think it is for this reason that whenever I think about my aunt, and TV for that matter, I can never remember my aunt's eyes. They appear to belong to someone else, and think instead of Robert Redford, who said in an interview that it is necessary for the body to lie to the mind, not the other way around, when acting, and that the various strata of lying are continually searching for each other in the wilderness that most people call the truth, and that my aunt calls television. For my aunt, TV can never really lie, because it is on all the time, unlike the theater, where there are all sorts of changes of scenery, and which as a result goes on and off, and is thus the perfect medium for telling lies after one another. But in my aunt's motel, the TV never goes off, and all these changes are not changes at all. They're commercials. For my aunt, and I think for Robert Redford, lying was a specific thing, like a baby crying in a room, or an animal with a soul, or at least those mental states that scientists believe trigger particular actions, like chasing after a bug or moving to another branch, which is to say that lying is the most sincere way of expressing oneself, and the best way anyone has of connecting one thing to another. As Paul Newman said, lying is a highly flirtatious and mechanical form that the body has of creating a gene pool. For this reason, lying is never natural in the reproductive sense, and is best expressed with the eyes, whose motions are perceived to be distinct from the soma form and somatic expressions. Everyone thinks you can make love with your eyes, but really the only thing you can do with your eyes is lie with them. People who cry a lot tend to have more affairs than those who don't. Lying and having sex are the best done with the eyes completely closed. To lie and have sex at the same time is one of the greatest things anyone can do. It is, of course, much harder to lie when staring directly at someone or something, like food that one likes. It's impossible to lie to a computer that's turned off. A blank computer screen can still remind us of a face. In the years since my aunt's death, I have often thought about what holds the parts of a family together. And I think it may be the lies told in families almost like ours, or in other words, American families in Ohio, not Chinese ones in Seattle. When we were growing up, my Chinese parents never told me much about my half-Chinese aunt, whether she was aunt on my mother's or my father's side, whether she was a real aunt or just a Chinese auntie, or whether she was an American person who looked half Asian. I called her gamin. I am pretty sure gamin means person related to a mother, even though nai nai and waipo are the words for grandmother on the father and mother side respectively, and she was neither one of these. I think kan means dry, and so gamin is probably a dry mother, or one who doesn't nurse you. I never called her Hayi, who I think was a real aunt on my mother's side and lived in New Jersey, even though she was 20 years younger than my mother and a stepsister to her. My step-aunt's Chinese name was probably not quite actually hers, and likewise, my aunt's name is not quite right either. My mother called my aunt big sister and sometimes second sister, none of which made much sense, as my mother had told my sister and me that she only had one sister, a half-sister, who was the daughter of her father and a second wife. Some names are simply too complicated or literal for American English, like a mother with no milk, or an aunt who is not an aunt but is called one anyway. At any rate, when thinking of my aunt, I think of her at odd hours of the day or evening, like a television playing accidentally in another room, just as I think of my mother and father giving themselves American names when they arrived in Seattle. The names for my family are linked, like a mirror or perhaps a footnote, to the physical world and to social inconsistencies and historical accidents. In other words, my mother and father rarely saw my aunt in my presence, except maybe once on our first and only family visit to a Chinese restaurant in Spokane. Some relatives are meant to be imagined years before or after they died. Okay, so we're going to do some poems now. And I'm going to read diary blog. I was reading a lot of blog things, and I noticed that in a lot of the blogs, they were addressed to someone. And the person addressed was you. And I couldn't figure out who you was, because it felt a little like someone you knew, or a friend, or possibly a lover. And so I was really interested in the pronoun you. So this is the poem called Diary Blog. And it's a little like a blog, and I guess a little like a diary, so that's why it's called that. All right. You are a part of the incompleteness of my afternoon, the lessons of, the motivational speakers of, etc., come upstairs. They see me at my desk. They raise the ocean's 1/2 of 3 degrees over a 20-year-old's life. They take the coffee apart like it's 2. The articulation, it comes apart too. A mother does this. A daughter does this. Everyone who is near me smells like anise. Nonetheless, I have been thinking about you at dinner. Eating dinner. Please see me on your phone. My speech is a little bit hard to make up. I think of myself as a restaurant in Chelsea that wakes up at 2 a.m. and goes to a restaurant in Chelsea. I do not need to look for tanning salons. I bruise myself. I get sick on envelopes. Saturday, you get married. The room I am constructing feels like alcohol in my head, which is decorated with conversations in fake Moroccan lamps, and everything is in it, even the glass dishes and candles, even the feet that belong to the feelings. They are painted red. Like you, this would seem unappetizing. In combinations, I've spent many evenings having tempura green beans and a bottle of a Côte d'Aron with you. In combinations, the restaurant is okay. Who are you? Tuesday. I know someone. Her name is Cheryl or Daryl, and she is an artist. I know Kmart is not nearby a lake. I know the pileated woodpecker and Windsong cologne and aftershave for $7.99. I know the English fonts. I know Google because it has completed my attention. My attention knows my wives and former girlfriends. I and they and everyone I know likes to gather me around wooden-shaped things like blankets or teeth sets or the occasional cockroach that are the aromas in my bedrooms. What are the occasional things that are occasional in kitchens? Are you still so silk-like and or sullen? Call me if you are not so bored as I am. Now and then, I don't like to see taxis at night, especially on 8th Avenue. I believe in my own obedience. Every star is an advertisement for another star. Every taxi is an advertisement for a bus. Cheryl is a television set made from wood and painted to look like you. You were here. You were talking to me in Japan. You were talking to me now. Then is now. I don't hear you anyway. I get tired because I am writing like a literary magazine at the annual Book Association meeting or a snowstorm inside a blog. Oh. Yeah. All I've done today is drink and read your emails. You forgot to sign your name. Cheryl, where are the planters and the screw gun that publishes itself on the internet every other year? Every other year it watches the TV. When I looked away, you had signed off without saying. Thursday, I write with small amounts of envy, and today is Monday or Tuesday. I receive an email from Harry, and one and then another big brown envelope stamped priority that includes all sorts of things I don't like. On it, I've photographed everything given to me in the past 3 years. Green and blue beach glass, driftwood, spice racks, Dansk food storage containers, a toaster oven, a Chinese chest, a Smithfield ham, a few pool balls, a check for $4,000, a book of poems, Rose, Where Did You Get That Red, vintage, 1974, by Kenneth Koch, a parakeet, a photo of a girl spray-painted yellow. On Friday, I tell you I want you, and I want you to know yourself. And I am very attracted to your eyelids and the minutes and the chairs that think they are volcanoes in your eyes, and I think you are standing between something I see and something I don't. But I don't really have a chair when this occurs, and you are yourself again and again, and yesterday, and oh, too much comes into this. All right, we're going to read one last poem. It's called Linguistics, and we're going to do a translation here. And Abigail wrote me an email as I was, before I came, when I was in New York, and she was asking me all sorts of questions about the poem because she was translating it. And of course, I couldn't answer any of the questions because I didn't really understand the poem. I did answer them, I tried. So one of the things she asked was, there's a line called "to be old," that's line 1, there's a line break, is to be owed, and that's O-D-E. And Abigail asked me, how do I translate that? What does that mean? And I was like, well, let me think about that, I'm not sure. And I said, well, when you're old, you start to write poems, right? So to be old is to be owed, you would write a poem. But it also means, and I didn't realize this till afterwards, is when you're old, people probably owe you a lot of money, right? So owed is also a pun on that. But I didn't realize that when we spoke. Now I know. But now I know, so I learned something about the poem. So how are we going to do this now? Oh.
You tell me.
Okay, I'm going to read 2 lines. This is all done in couplets. So I'm going to read a couplet in English, and then Abigail's going to read a couplet in French. Sound good?
Sure.
Okay, very good. I'll pull away so you can get to the
No.
mic. Is that right?
Yeah.
Should we do this? Okay.
Yes. That's easier.
Oh, and Abigail asked me, because there are a lot of colons and slash marks here, was I going to read them? So I was not really sure if I should read colons and slash marks. So I haven't decided yet, so we're going to do this impromptu. Oh, I am analytic and 0 to 1 in a given.
O, je suis analytique et 0,1 dans une région.
Region, unloved, backslash labial, and such unlikeness in a most minor foot.
Donné, mal aimé labial et une telle dissemblance dans un pied si mineur.
Signs suggest an ampersand.
2 points, les signes suggèrent, 2 points, une esperluette.
To be old is to be owed.
Être âgé, c'est être élégiaque.
To be qualified is a stipulation, a slope on the sycamore, a day when pancakes are the middle of a week.
Être qualifié est une stipulation. 2 points, une pente sur le sycomore, 2 points, un jour où les pancakes tombent au milieu d'une semaine.
Ode to weakness, whatever I am, the situation inside the marriage, phonetic notation.
Ode à la faiblesse, quoi que je sois, la situation à l'intérieur du mariage, notation phonétique.
Situation to the rodeo, the fleece demeans the contribution. Pajamas.
Situation au rodéo, la toison dévalorise la contribution. Pyjama.
It would be impractical, lateral tap, to explain impoverished speakers.
Il serait impraticable, consonne battue latérale, d'expliquer des locuteurs démunis.
In English, to pronounce sounds. I care if I am kissed.
En anglais, prononcer des sons, qu'on m'embrasse illico.
My father came back floral, augmentations in audio, and floral is a door.
Mon frère est revenu fleuri, augmentation dans l'audio, et floral est une porte.
O, middle low, IPA key, rhyme the half-long phones. O, half in the past. O, and again, O.
O, mi-bas, clavier API, faire rimer les phones, mi-long. O, moitié au passé, O, et encore O.
Thank you. And thank you to Abigail for that lovely translation, and for translating everything, actually. Please.